There are moments in history when the noise of the world quiets, and a deeper voice begins to speak, a voice not from nations, but from truth itself. What you're about to hear is more than a report, it's a revelation. It's about power, pride, and the unseen hand that humbles even the highest. In this moment of global unrest, we're reminded that nothing escapes divine justice, and no one stands so tall that they cannot be shaken. Stay with me, because by the end of this message, you won't just see the headlines. You'll understand the higher purpose behind them. For years, powerful nations have viewed Iran through a lens of arrogance. They calculated its every move as though they knew the playbook. They assumed that when pushed, Iran would protest, posture, then retreat. But in doing so, they made the critical mistake of underestimating the heart of a nation shaped by struggle, survival, and strategy. It wasn't just a miscalculation. It was a disregard for the kind of quiet resilience that doesn't broadcast its potential until the moment it's needed most. Iran has long been labeled as the underdog in the international power game. Sanctions, isolation, and targeted operations were believed to have weakened its capacity and spirit. Analysts sitting behind desks in the West drew lines on maps and circled dates on calendars, confident that any retaliation would be more symbolic than serious. They thought it would be loud enough to stir emotions but soft enough to ignore strategically. What they didn't see, what they chose not to see, was that Iran had been preparing, waiting, and watching. It wasn't a nation scrambling in reaction, it was a force calculating in silence. When the response came, it wasn't desperate, it was deliberate. It wasn't a flare of anger, it was a broadcast of capability. The world saw the shockwaves, but they didn't realize the seed of this retaliation had been planted long ago. And now that the world has been forced to look again, it's clear, Iran was never outmatched, it was just overlooked. It took a single, unexpected move to expose the flawed thinking behind years of overconfidence. The underdog didn't just bite back, it proved it was never behind. The myth of weakness shattered, not with noise, but with precision. When Iran launched its unexpected and forceful retaliation, it wasn't just a shock to its intended target. It sent tremors through military command centers across the globe. The precision, the coordination, and the sheer boldness of the strike triggered a chain reaction of high-alert protocols in nations that had grown comfortable believing their enemies were predictable. Security analysts were jolted into real-time recalculations, and defense officials scrambled to assess what they had missed. Everything from satellite intelligence to ground-based surveillance was suddenly re-examined with urgency. This was not a reckless lashing out, it was surgical. It struck not just physical targets, but psychological ones. It disrupted the belief that power only flows one way. And for command centers, where threats are usually modeled and measured on screens, the retaliation broke through the theoretical and landed squarely in reality. Emergency briefings ran deep into the night. Joint Chiefs met with tight jaws and tense brows, no longer discussing if Iran had capabilities, but how far those capabilities now extended. For years, contingency plans sat in folders, collecting dust. Overnight, they were pulled from drawers, updated, and restructured. There was an undeniable energy in those rooms, an anxious respect that hadn't been there before. Iran had done more than retaliate. It had forced the world's most powerful military minds to rethink their assumptions and reposition their strategies. Maps were redrawn, threat levels were raised, and scenarios that once seemed implausible suddenly felt far too possible. The confidence that once filled those command centers turned into a hum of controlled panic. Because when a nation you thought could only make noise delivers a calculated blow, you realize the game isn't what you thought it was. The chessboard just changed, and the other side wasn't playing checkers. They were studying your every move. In the immediate aftermath of Iran's retaliation, something strange settled over the world stage: silence. Not the silence of peace, but the stillness of nations caught off guard. Statements that usually come swiftly from podiums and press rooms were delayed. World leaders known for their confident rhetoric became unusually measured, as if every word needed to be weighed twice before leaving their lips. The usual bravado gave way to caution. Behind the scenes, however, the air was thick with activity. Diplomats were dialing private lines, Intelligence officers were pulled into back briefings. Global alliances began holding closed-door meetings, not just to respond, but to recalibrate. The reason wasn't just the force of the attack, it was the realization that the rules of engagement had shifted. No longer could leaders speak of Iran as if it were merely a regional irritant or a rhetorical talking point. The magnitude of the retaliation demanded a new kind of diplomacy, one that traded condescension for calculation. In embassies and foreign offices, strategy sessions took on a more serious tone. Ambassadors reported increased tension in the halls of international institutions, where even allies started questioning each other's intelligence assessments and future intentions. The media, usually fed soundbites and statements, were left speculating. Official responses were slow, sometimes contradicting earlier positions. The public, watching this hesitancy unfold, sensed a discomfort in their leaders that couldn't be easily disguised. This wasn't a moment to spin. It was a moment to reassess. The silence wasn't about restraint. It was about uncertainty. It was the stillness of power trying to find its footing again. The panic wasn't in the volume of words, but in the lack of them. And in those quiet corridors of diplomacy, where influence is often built in whispers, those whispers just got a lot more serious. For decades, certain global powers operated with an air of invincibility, confident that their military dominance and political alliances would shield them from serious retaliation. The illusion was sustained by a steady stream of controlled conflicts, proxy wars, and one-sided strikes. Iran, in the eyes of many, was expected to absorb the blows and respond with rhetoric rather than reach. That perception has now been shattered. When the retaliation came, it didn't just hit targets, it hit assumptions. It disrupted the deeply rooted belief that some nations could act without consequence, immune to real challenge. This moment forced a harsh awakening. Suddenly, it became clear that the balance of power isn't as one-sided as the world imagined. For years, leaders walked on stages boasting about technological superiority and unmatched intelligence networks. They believed their skies were safe, their assets untouchable. But Iran's calculated response revealed vulnerabilities that were supposed to be hidden beneath layers of defense systems and deterrence. This wasn't just about missiles or drones. It was about the message behind them. It said, "We see you and we can reach you." In a single night, the narrative of superiority was pierced, and with that, the world saw something rarely admitted by those in charge: fear. Not the fear of collapse, but the fear of losing control. The fear that the old ways of managing threats through dominance and intimidation might no longer work. This shift didn't require a full-scale war. It only took one powerful demonstration of precision and resolve to remind the world that no nation is beyond reach. The myth that might alone ensure safety was dismantled. What was once seen as absolute security now feels like relative advantage, and that shift in perception carries consequences that will echo far beyond the battlefield. The ripple effect of Iran's unexpected retaliation extended far beyond the battlefield. Within hours, global markets reacted with visible unease. Oil prices surged, investors scrambled for safe havens, and stock indices dipped across continents. It wasn't just about regional instability. It was about the fear of escalation, the uncertainty of where this would lead. The economic heartbeat of the world momentarily skipped. Traders, analysts, and CEOs sat glued to news feeds, trying to understand not just what had happened, but what it meant for tomorrow. The markets don't wait for diplomacy. They respond to signals, and this one was loud. At the same time, media outlets around the globe raced to interpret the strike. Headlines clashed with speculation, official responses, and a wave of disinformation. Conflicting narratives poured in from every direction. Was this the beginning of a larger war? Was there an unspoken agreement being tested? Or had a new geopolitical line just been crossed? News anchors, experts, and politicians struggled to keep up with the pace of unfolding developments, while social media exploded with emotion, conspiracy, and confusion. In the vacuum of certainty, chaos filled the space. On the ground, the average person, far from the missiles, far from the war rooms, felt the weight in subtler but significant ways. Rising fuel prices, fear of travel disruptions, and a growing anxiety about what the future might hold created an emotional tension in households around the world. People who had never spoken about Iran now whispered about war, about safety, about the fragility of peace. A distant act of retaliation had become a global moment of reckoning. The decision of one nation to push back didn't just affect soldiers and statesmen. It shook the systems that connect us all, reminding the world how tightly our lives are woven into the decisions made in shadows. Iran's retaliation was more than a military maneuver. It was a declaration of agency. For years, the country was treated as a background player in a geopolitical drama directed by global powers. Its role was often framed as reactive, isolated, and defensive. But this time, Iran stepped out of the wings and onto center stage, not as a victim or bystander, but as a bold actor claiming its place. The message was unmistakable. Iran will not remain silent in the face of provocation, and it will not accept the role assigned to it by others. This was not just about vengeance or retaliation. It was about redefining Iran's identity in the global order. It was a strategic, calculated demonstration of capability, designed to shift perceptions and challenge long-standing narratives. With a single act, Iran told the world it is not merely a regional entity enduring sanctions and pressure. It is a nation with reach, resolve, and readiness. It was not waiting for permission to respond, nor seeking validation from international institutions. It acted with conviction and communicated through action what years of diplomacy and negotiation had not achieved. The strike echoed with a deeper significance. It forced global powers to view Iran through a different lens, not as a state reacting out of desperation, but as one moving with deliberate intent. This wasn't noise meant to provoke. It was precision meant to prove. It wasn't about chaos. It was about control. Iran positioned itself not only as a military force, but as a geopolitical voice that demands to be heard. In doing so, it sent a clear message. The era of underestimation is over, and those who believed Iran would remain in the shadows must now reckon with its emergence into full, visible defiance. The events following Iran's retaliation forced the world to confront a troubling reality. Modern warfare isn't just about missiles and military targets. It's about the moral complexity buried beneath every decision. For too long, governments have justified their actions with sanitized language, collateral damage, strategic necessity, preemptive defense. But when a nation hits back with such deliberate force, the questions begin to pile up. What justifies a strike? Who gets to decide when enough is enough? And at what point does defense become aggression? In the fog of modern conflict, morality becomes a moving target. Each side claims righteousness, each action framed as justified by what came before. Iran's retaliation wasn't launched in a vacuum. It was a response layered with years of tension, sanctions, and prior attacks. But when it came, the world was forced to look not just at what Iran did, but at what brought them to this point. The easy narratives, good versus evil, civilized versus rogue, began to blur. Suddenly, civilians across the globe found themselves questioning the black and white images they'd been shown for years. Governments that once condemned violence now found themselves reviewing their own histories, their own involvement, their own selective outrage. When retaliation comes with precision and purpose, it becomes harder to dismiss it as irrational or extremist. The moral compass wavers. Lines that once seemed clearly drawn now shift beneath the weight of reality. And that is the deepest discomfort of all, that modern warfare isn't simply about who struck first or who struck hardest, but about whether anyone can still claim the high ground when the dust settles. The world was reminded that in every act of retaliation, no matter how justified it may seem to one side, there is a shadow of consequence that stretches across the conscience of all who watch. The world watched, expecting a whisper, but received a thunderclap. Iran's retaliation shattered assumptions, exposed vulnerabilities, and shifted the balance of perception. In a single calculated move, it rewrote the narrative of dominance and silence, turning global power on its heels. This wasn't just about missiles, it was about message, presence, and principle, As panic spread through command centers and headlines, the lesson became clear: no nation should be underestimated. The game has changed, and so must our understanding of it. Thank you for listening with open minds. Stay informed, stay grounded, and may clarity guide your steps. Good luck, and God bless you.